Mel Akerman.
I'm Anne Woolfield.
And I'm Carla Pecoraro, and we're your hosts of the Uterine Sound podcast, bringing you up-to-date information on all things ONG. This week's podcast is all about the RANZCOG written exam. We've had a few requests to write this episode, so here you go, as requested. Now, firstly, we just want to clarify that these are our own random tips, and this is not official RANZCOG advice.
So the first question we tend to get asked is, when should I sit the RANZCOG written examination?
There are usually 2 examinations per year, one at the end of January or early Feb and one in July. You can't apply to sit the written examination until you've completed your first year of training, which means the earliest time you could sit the exam is halfway through your second year of training. You'll need to pass the written exam before you can sit the oral examination, and you need to pass both before you can progress to your advanced training years at the end of year 4. So this gives you a 2.5-year window to complete both exams.
Now, you've got 3 attempts to pass your written and 3 attempts to pass your orals. The exams are quite difficult and sometimes life can get in the way, so it's good to plan to do your exams early to give yourself a bit of a buffer in case you need to cancel an exam or in case you have to resit. This takes the pressure off a little bit and lessens some of the stress you have about getting all your requirements for basic training done in time.
It's really up to you to decide when the best time is to sit your exams. You'll need to consider what suits you and your family because it really does influence everyone around you.
The dates for applying for the exam are usually on the RANZCOG website, but currently the application dates for next year's exams aren't out yet. So do keep an eye out for any RANZCOG updates. At the moment, it costs about $2,500 to sit the exam, and this is payable when your registration is confirmed. But as with everything else in life, costs are always rising, so this will probably change next year. Unfortunately, you do have to pay that amount every time you sit the exam, so if you need to sit it more than once, it does become quite costly.
The next thing to consider is when to start studying. Do you get started as soon as possible when you get onto training? Do you need 1,000 hours like the anaesthetic exam? How much time should you set aside?
I would say that you need about 6 months of hardcore studying for this exam. There is a lot of content to cover, and you'll need to allow some time for illness, revision, and catching up on anything you miss. So 7 or 8 months would really be even better. Respect the exam and do give it the time that it needs. I personally started studying half-heartedly halfway through my first year, but it was really pretty light, mainly reading a guideline here and there and making some pretty useless notes on it. I really got into it about 7 months before the exam, and I found this gave me just enough time to get through a 6-month study plan, plus some downtime for revision.
And definitely set up a study plan, because without looking into the future, you're not sure how long it's going to take and what actually suits your lifestyle and your days and your family around you. And Anne, you're sitting the written exam in February. When have you started studying? Is 6 months enough or not enough?
Well, 6 months to me seems like a really short time. I started studying in February, March this year, so 11 months, but I haven't been hardcore studying the whole time. I wanted to allow a bit more time for a 5-week holiday, which I'm currently on, or will at least be by the time this episode is published.
Woohoo!
But I'm also partway through a research project, and so I didn't want to get too busy. One of my colleagues said 9 months to grow a baby, 9 months to pass an exam. So I guess it's just different for everyone.
And then, Mel, how did you actually study for this exam? Did you pick up a textbook? Did you read all the guidelines? How should we get started?
It's all about the study plan. So there are already a few study plans out there, so don't go reinventing the wheel. Just pick one that worked for your friends and use that. I used one on Dropbox in a folder called Joe Stuff, which was a 25-week plan that presumably some amazing person called Joe created. Joe, whoever you are, thank you. I think Anne's using a similar plan, but the weeks are in a slightly different order. What they are is usually a 24 to 26-week plan that lists the topics you'll be covering each week. And then in a folder for each week, they also have the relevant short answer questions saved into that file. It's pure genius.
You'll also want to get a study group, if that's your style. It'll keep you accountable to a schedule, and it's really good to have a few people to bounce ideas off. I found starting the week by doing all the short answer questions for that week, studying my own, trying to improve my answers, going through each topic, and then going through the answers together with my study group. Or I start by reading all the previous short answer questions so that I know what information I'm looking for as I'm studying, and then try and answer them right at the end. The study group's really helpful for correcting things if you're missing, or if you've got something completely wrong, or pointing out things that I might have missed.
It is actually amazing just how far you can get through your training before realizing that you had something completely wrong. For example, I have been pronouncing it labia my whole life when apparently it is labia.
Mel!
I just think
That's
labia
so
sounds
good.
so much prettier.
Labia. Sounds
but
like a
also,
dip.
labia. But just to throw one of my friends under the bus, she was really convinced that kneeling breech was an actual fetal position. You know who you are.
Amazing.
I was so lucky. I had a really good study group. We actually all took turns being smarter than each other, which was nice. And we started trying to meet in person, but quickly realized that that's actually incredibly unproductive. So basically we would have, the time to drive to someone's house, then we would bring food, so we'd have to eat that. We'd gossip and have to catch up a little bit about what happened. And then we realized that we didn't actually want to study and we'd feed off that and we just wanted to hang out instead. So meeting up on Zoom or Teams is so much better and it's much easier for people's schedules. Plus, you tend to just log in, get straight to the point and leave without, wasting time with waffle.
And it's great to have a group of people who are going through the same thing together. A problem shared is a problem halved. I've heard there are a few good hospital-based study groups around as well.
Yeah, there is a really fantastic study group run by Dr. Adam Bush at the Mater Hospital. This guy's an absolute legend and also a genuinely nice human being, and he donates a lot of his time to help RANZCOG trainees preparing for their exams. So typically he'll give you a question or two to do, and then he goes through a model answer. It's a really great learning environment and very non-judgmental. I highly recommend him, so feel free to reach out to him if you are wanting to join a group, and he's happy for more people to join in as well.
I second this. I've been going to a few of his sessions and they've been super helpful.
If you're from a different state, please also let us know of any groups where you are so that we can add them to our new database and then everyone can get involved. Okay, so you want to pick a study plan, do that week's short answer questions at the beginning of the week, do your own study, and then go through the answers to the questions with your study group. Sounds simple enough. Simples. Now, what resources should people be using?
Oh my God, there are so many resources out there and it can be really overwhelming. So it doesn't take you long to realize that it's actually physically impossible to go through everything. So you really do need to be selective. Firstly, you need to make sure you're on top of all of the guidelines. In Australia, we use the RANZCOG guidelines, but we also rely on the UK's Green Top guidelines as well. ACID and SOMANS are also very relevant. It can also be useful to look up the statewide guidelines. So Queensland Clinical Guidelines, SA Health and KEMH all have pretty useful guidelines that are quite good at summarising all the information. And I'm sure some of the other states have their own helpful guidelines as well. I would suggest that you actually make a list of all the guidelines so you can go through and work out what all the RANZCOG ones are called and what are the Green Top ones are called and kind of type them into a document. And that'll just make sure that you don't miss any. And then as you do go through and read them as you're coming up with those study topics, just check them off. Up to date's actually also really helpful to make sure you haven't missed anything. And it can also be really good to point you in the direction of relevant studies that you might not have come across. But do be mindful that the practices in the USA can be very different to what we do here. So take some of the recommendations with a grain of salt.
Okay, let's talk textbooks. So here's a few that we recommend. Catherine Nelson Piercy's Handbook of Obstetric Medicine, Obstetrics and Gynaecology, an evidence-based text for the RANZCOG is also a good one. Williams' Obstetrics and Gynaecology, the Compendium for Antenatal Care of High-Risk Pregnancies.
Look, now I know that everybody loves Williams' Obstetrics and Gynaecology, and I'm not doubting that these are absolutely fantastic resources. It's just that they are ginormous textbooks, and honestly, just the look of them overwhelms me. And I'm going to be real, I haven't once opened that textbook.
Don't forget to sign up for the RANZCOG written exam course online. There are a lot of great lectures on there. Some of them are really targeted at the exam, whereas others are more for general knowledge. They're recorded, so if you miss them, you can watch them back at double speed. RCOG also has an online course that you can sign up to. You'll need to sign up as an associate and then purchase access to their core knowledge tutorials. Their content is really good and it's a simple way to study, but they do take a while and they aren't 100% necessary.
I also recommend utilising multimedia. So sometimes I knew I needed to study, but I really just didn't have it in me to read anything, or my eyes were really sore from staring at the computer so much. So in those situations, I would look for YouTube videos on various topics. There is actually a girl who reads out the Green Top guidelines, Dr. Abia F.G, and you can find all sorts of recorded lectures from other people.
Podcasts can also be super helpful in the drive to work or if you're exercising or something. Creogs Over Coffee, Dr. Tapper's Clinical Pearls, and the COG podcast are all great. We hope our podcast fits in there right in the Australian setting.
So, what about using other people's notes or taking your own notes? What do you guys recommend?
I am a bit of a note fiend. I really like to make my own notes. I find that it just helps me to consolidate and remember the information if I put it down in my own words. Now, I did look at other people's notes, but only after I made my own, and this was mainly just to make sure that I hadn't missed anything. But I know that some people do rely completely on other people's notes, and if that works for you, that is totally fine and probably much more efficient.
Yeah, I also tend to write my own notes, although I'm very behind on my study schedule at the moment because it takes a while.
So I will definitely annotate someone else's notes to make them my own. And I have to use my hands and write it and say things out loud and listen to it. And it's repetition, repetition, repetition. So if someone else has better notes than me, I'm definitely using them. But it's not going to stay in my brain until I've done the work and done the repetition myself.
That's such a good point. Some people actually will only benefit from handwriting their notes. Okay, so the next thing to know is how to answer the short answer questions. So these questions use very specific verbs that tell you how you should answer the question. So you really should pay attention to those. For example, they might use words like describe, justify, explain, list. Pay attention to these instructions and just do what the question asks. If the question asks you to describe your management of shoulder dystocia and justify your actions, then you want to do exactly that. But for this question, I would do, a simple two-column table. So in the first column, I'd put my action and the description, for example, Mick Roberts' position, and then describe what that point is. So hyperflexion and abduction of the maternal hips. And then in column 2, I would put my justification. So why am I doing this position? Well, because it flattens the lumbosacral spine, it rotates the maternal pelvis, and it increases the relative AP diameter of the pelvis, and it also has a high success rate. Now, the terms describe, discuss, and explain all tend to mean very similar things in that they want you to give some level of detail to your answers beyond just listing something.
If the question asks for a list, it's good to assume that each item on the list is worth at least half a point, but kind of have a look at the marking criteria there. So if the question asks for a list of risk factors and it's for 3 points, then try and give it at least 6 risk factors. If the question asks you to list 3 risk factors and for 3 points, then you just need to list 3 risk factors. Although it's good to realise that we don't actually know how RANZCOG marks, but there doesn't seem to be any negative marking.
It's also a good idea to get feedback on how you're answering questions early so that you can hone your technique and get out of bad habits early. Ask one of your seniors to send you a couple of questions and get feedback on your exam answers. They've been through this before and are usually more than happy to give you some pointers.
Okay, next we'll go into specifically how to prep for the short answer questions. The SAQ is actually 2 separate examinations, 6 questions on obstetrics and 6 on gynaecology, and you get 2 hours for each exam, which works out to be about 20 minutes per question. The whole day is actually quite big, 7.5 hours. You do your 2-hour exam, short break, another 2-hour SAQ, another break, then the 2-hour MCQ. Mel, what did you find worked best for you?
I realized that if you do the short answer question first and then you study, that was actually much better because it really helps you to get a vibe for what kind of questions might be asked, which then helps you realize which parts of the guideline are more likely to be examinable. And you kind of get into this frame of mind where you think, if I was an examiner, I would definitely write a question on this, and that helps you to pay attention to that information. So as we spoke about before, you want to start your week by doing the practice SAQs allocated to the week of the study plan before you do your own study. Don't look the answers up straight away. Just do them with whatever knowledge you already have. And this is going to help you identify gaps in your knowledge. But also when you come across that topic in your free study, you're going to pay a lot more attention to it. As you study during the week, you can formulate more complete answers to the short answer question to discuss with your study group. Also, get your hands on as many past exam papers as possible. These are floating around out there and usually someone you know will have a copy of them. RANZCOG has heaps of their past exam papers on their Acquire website. In addition to the study plan SAQs, I actually also recommend doing a complete past short answer exam once every 1 or 2 weeks, so just one of the 2-hour ones. Try to keep to time as this will help you build stamina and prepare you for the realities in the day. On the day, you typically have about 20 minutes per question, so I do recommend practicing to 15 minutes where possible. This really helped me factor in the time on the day for my inevitable existential crisis, where I would just be staring at the question in panic thinking, oh my God, I didn't study that, or what the hell am I going to answer here?
For the MCQs, it's about doing lots of past questions and doing them frequently. The MCQ is 100 questions in 2 hours, so if you practice at 1 minute per question, you'll be fine. There are a few MCQ sets floating around on some of the flashcard websites like Quizlet or Anki, which are pretty good. They also grade you, which can be really helpful. There's also some on the RANZCOG website. You want to aim for 100% on these apps, although just be aware that some of the answers can be wrong. 20 minutes a day is all you need. Just get it done whenever you get the chance. Although I do not do this. It reminded me of things that I should be doing.
You don't do your MCQs?
Sometimes.
No, you need to do MCQs. MCQs is purely past MCQs. Just do your MCQs, Anne. I swear to God, everybody listening, tell Anne to do her MCQs. Look, you can also do the RANZCOG practice MCQs on the college website. Now, the MCQs, they're actually incredibly random, and I really find that just general studying and general knowledge is not enough to get you through the MCQs. If you're you really just need to do the past questions and do your MCQs. If you're going to study, though, for the MCQs, then I suggest that you go through the question and learn the reason for each answer. So why is the answer C? Why isn't it A? Why is B wrong? If you can research the reasons behind why the answer is or isn't a certain thing, then you'll be much more likely to get the question right if it gets tweaked a little bit.
Yeah, but this is an excellent tip. And absolutely, repetition is key. Doing all of the questions, especially Anne, because she's going to go home and do them all right now. Just do them all the time. Repetition, repetition, repetition. All right, so let's move on to the next part of study, the landmark trials. We're trying to help you get through these with our Evidence with Anne episodes, but will there come a point where you just have to read the damn trials?
Yes. Well, I guess it depends. Some people will have summary tables of them. But the landmark trials are also on the RANZCOG website. Last I checked, there were 22 obstetric trials and 10 gynae trials, but I know they keep changing. So you need to know these in depth. Specifically, title, author, year, journal, the aim of the study, methods, think buzzwords, multi-center, randomized, double-blind, etc. Inclusion and exclusion criteria if they're relevant, the primary and secondary outcomes, results, and conclusions.
Look, personally, I left these until the absolute last minute and just crammed them. You do want to spend some time studying these, though, so that if you do happen to get an exam question that is purely about a landmark trial, then you will be able to answer it. If you haven't studied the landmark trials and an entire question is on it, you're completely screwed. What I did is I would just read the trial and highlight the info I needed, then type it into a 1-page summary document. And then for the cramming, I summarized my 1-page document into a tiny little table. And that was just a couple of pages that had all of the trials on it, so with as many buzzwords as possible. And then, I hate to admit this, but I just read it repeatedly in the car drive on the way to the exam and really hoped that some of that knowledge sticked in my head.
And don't forget that the list of landmark trials is not exhaustive, so you may need to reference some other important trials.
Look, whenever I was studying a topic like PPROM, for example, I would also just make a little summary of the other important trials at the end of my revision sheet. So just, a little title and a small summary of the aim and the results. And that way, if I needed to refer to any evidence to support my answers, then I could quote a finding from a random study to make my answer look real suave.
Excellent. And that wraps up our content side of things. Let's get into some of the other things to consider when planning for your exams. What about leave? Is there a right time to take it?
Most people will time their leave around the exam. It's kind of disappointing for not being able to have a whole lot of exciting holidays unless you're Anne. My exam was in June and I had 2 weeks off in March and then 2 weeks off before the exam. And I would love to say that I used that time to take a holiday, but I didn't. It was pretty much all used for study. I found that 1 to 2 weeks off before the exam was really helpful for revision. It is not the time to learn new things. Some of our colleagues have taken 3 weeks off, but the feedback is that you really lose momentum after the 2 weeks. So 2 weeks is probably better than 3 towards the end. I also highly recommend taking time off after the exam. I didn't do that and I do really regret it. The exam is exhausting and you really need some time to recover and catch your breath after it. So if you can, plan some time off afterwards as well. Treat yourself. I also recommend that if you can swing a random day or week off here and there, or even take a day of PDL, that can be really helpful for catching up on study because all of us inevitably fall behind with our best laid plans.
Not to mention catching up on sleep and your mental health. This exam sounds ridiculously exhausting. How do you guys make sure you take care of yourselves when you're preparing for this marathon exam?
Self-care is so important. You really need to try and keep up the basics of your health. sleep, diet, and exercise. Minimize other commitments. We know FOMO sucks, but you really want to pass this exam. Just do it. Future you will thank you. Take regular breaks and don't be hard on yourself if you're running behind or you miss a day of studying. Some of our friends recommend dedicating 1 day per week to not studying. It's not always possible, but it can give you something to look forward to.
And study guilt is real. There are often times when you feel guilty doing something else because you know you should be studying. Just be aware of that and fight it off if it happens. You can't fight it off. It's always there. Don't forget your mental health is actually just as important as physical health. And if you think you're starting to get burnt out, then don't be afraid to take a day off to take care of yourself.
Oh, and definitely take care of your eyes. Staring at a computer screen for so long really hurts your eyes. So make sure you're blinking, looking off into the distance every 30 minutes, and use eye drops if you have to. I've actually heard of a few people needing glasses after this exam. So let's talk study strategies. What are your best tips for studying?
So if I'm on a day off studying, I like to break it up a little bit. Usually try and get a couple of hours in, either revision, new topics, go for a walk, get a coffee, come back, get a few more couple of hours in. By the afternoon, usually I'm pretty fried, so then I'll try and get some exercise, which really help. Personally, I drink a lot of coffee and tea. Now's not the time to cut those guilty pleasures. And I've really made a conscious effort to eat well. I actually think I've been eating healthier this year than like the last 5 years.
Look, I am not an expert on the RANZCOG exams, but when I was studying for the USMLE exams, I was not as good as Anne doing the eating and drinking and health well. I was definitely leaning into a block of chocolate a day. But I was also using the Pomodoro technique. So I was setting a 25-minute timer and then a 5-minute break. And I would wake up at 4:30 in the morning because I didn't know when I would finish work. So I would have to do my study in the morning before I went just to know I got it in. I'd leave my phone in another room. I'd write up a study plan and tick it off. And I set up a study space that I actually liked being in. I bought a really nice candle. I had good lighting. It was nowhere near my bed, so I couldn't lie in it.
Look, I definitely agree with not cutting out your guilty pleasures. I'm also a big fan of energy drinks. Terrible for your health, excellent for your mind. But sometimes I would make myself a little cheese platter, maybe a glass of wine to have when I was studying. And I would also set myself little rewards. Now, you've got to beware of rabbit holes, which, as you know, we all love to go down here on the Uterine Sound. So the more you learn about something, the more you realize just how much more there is to know, and you actually just touching the tip of the iceberg. And it can be so easy to get sidetracked by some random fact that you find interesting and just need to know more about, aka eggnog. While this is great for increasing the depth of your knowledge, it is also super detrimental to your already limited time.
When you don't have an exam coming up, then you can go down more rabbit holes because it tricks your brain into thinking studying is fun and it's more easy to learn for life and interest rather than to learn for an exam. Patients seen at the hospital make it easier to consolidate and repetition. Trying to explain something to a med student made me realize the things I didn't fully understand. And then they'd ask me a question and I'd be like, what? Why don't I know that either? So new segue, new learning topic.
What about when you just don't want to do it anymore? Any tips?
Oh my God, I remember those days. Unfortunately, they will happen all of the time. Nobody wants to study for 6 months straight. So my top tips would be the Pomodoro technique. Set a 20-minute timer, just do it. I also suggest that you have a friend that you can message when you're not feeling it and get them to either motivate you and drag you back up to do it, or to just agree with you and validate your feelings that this sucks. And bribery. One of my big procrastinating techniques was to look up random things that I wanted to buy, mainly from Pillow Talk because I was going through my interior decorating era. So I got my heart set on this ridiculous monkey statue. And once I covered a topic I really didn't want to study, I went out and I bought myself that monkey. My partner hates that monkey, but it still takes pride and place on my kitchen bench and it brings me joy and it got me through my darkest days of studying. So you have got to do something that brings you joy. And if you need to bribe yourself to do it, then you do that.
And sometimes just take a break. If you try and push through studying, probably isn't going to be that effective. So sometimes get outdoors, rest your mind, reset.
All right, so let's get down to the final weeks before the exam. Should your study technique change at all?
Yeah, look, I think that it should. So it's kind of hard because usually by the time you're getting up to those last 2 weeks, you probably haven't finished your study plan. But I would really suggest those last couple of weeks that you dedicate to revision. So the first part of that is probably going to be finishing your study plan. And then realistically, you'll probably have 1 week for revision. I really went over the top a little bit, made summaries of my summaries and then PowerPoints of those summaries and then Instagram of those PowerPoint summaries. But I'm well and truly over the top, and you definitely do not need to go that far. But for me, I found it really helpful to keep summarizing things to consolidate my knowledge.
Sleep, drink water, eat well, exercise. You need to be physically well.
Yeah, I get migraines and they are stress-induced many times. So I used to have to take melatonin so that I would get my 8 hours of sleep. I'd have to exercise stupid 30 minutes every day. And then I got really superstitious. So I'd have steak and broccoli the night before.
And finally, what should you do on the day to prepare yourself?
Sleep well, have a high-protein breakfast, prophylactic Panadol and Nurofen, and don't skip your coffee.
Yeah, Panadol Nurofen, that's a good idea. You do not want to be getting a headache halfway through that exam or caffeine withdrawals. But you also don't want to be getting up and doing a wee. So you've just got to time that coffee right. Definitely bring water and snacks. This is a huge day. Look, chocolates are an absolutely terrible idea. I put them, so you can bring like a clear plastic bag in with some of your snacks in it. And my chocolates just melted into everything else and made an absolute mess, which is a disaster. But you do sometimes need sugar, so glucose, good for your brain. So bring some lollies if you need to. And I also had a water bottle with a Boost in it. So this is essentially an energy drink. It's like a Barocca with caffeine, and it is delicious. I highly recommend it. Also, plan to go out for drinks afterwards. You finish, you're exhausted, you think you screwed it up and you just want to go home and drown in your sorrows. No, forget about it. Everybody feels the same as you, so just go celebrate and wallow together.
And what should we expect after the exam?
6 weeks of anxiety, essentially, while you're waiting for your results. You go through all this prep and stress until the day of the exam, and then there is absolutely nothing in your control for that next 6 weeks. You will have so much free time once you finish this exam. I also recommend taking a holiday after the exam. I did not do that, and I really needed it, and it takes a while to recover from burnout after that. And what do you do when you get your results? Well, you passed, well done. Go and enjoy your celebration with your friends. If you failed, well, that sucks, but don't be disheartened. You are in very good company. Some of the best obstetricians I know failed their written exam first and sometimes even the second or third time. It's a really hard exam. You can usually talk to the college if you did fail and get some feedback on what you could do differently. If it's your third time and you still haven't passed, have a good chat to your training supervisor, but also to the college. There are some supports in place to help you out, and it doesn't always mean you're kicked out of training. Talk to your training rep and the college. They really do want to help you out.
Well, that's a wrap on our study tips. We just want to say that this is just our own advice. You should really pick and choose what works for you best and completely ignore the rest. We're not experts, just wanting to give you our tips to help you do the best you can.
If you are listening to this episode, please let us know what you guys do. Obviously, this is not a RANZCOG endorsed episode. They are definitely just our own tips and tricks.